Let's dive into anxiety specifically. So it's really helpful for me to see that a lot of what you're facing is, many of you are speaking about 13, 14-year-olds and the anxiety that they're feeling. Two great questions too. I have anxiety, how do I help my kid with anxiety? Or I don't have anxiety, how do I help my kid with anxiety? I think first and foremost to recognize that anxiety is normal, right? We all have anxiety. Anxiety is a normal part of the brain. The amygdala kind of creates this little heightened alert. So anxiety is a normal process. The problem is that when anxiety kind of stays with us, that cortisol drip we were talking about, and it keeps the brain in that heightened alert, that's when anxiety becomes problematic. So when does anxiety become a problem? Let's look at that. Anxiety becomes a problem when there is an intense fear for the future, worries last a long time, or physical symptoms such as sleep problems, stomach aches, and body pains. Sometimes our kids are feeling and sensing physical things that we don't realize are actually anxiety related. Honestly, the truth is some of us as adults are facing anxiety and dealing with anxiety, and we don't realize it. We haven't named it that, but it's just a spectrum of anxiety. Now again, going on this, if we said there was a continuum, normal anxiety, we all deal with it, we cope with it, we slide back and forth in this normal range. When it gets into anxiety becomes a problem, that's where it goes beyond like a few weeks. Like it kind of, we stay in that heightened alert, we stay in that intense fear of the future. That's when it becomes a problem. But especially if they're younger kids, like for instance, when my kids were, 7, 8, 9, and they were dealing with anxiety or anxiety symptoms, oftentimes it would come in the form of a stomach ache, having an intense fear of being watched or judged by others, that's social anxiety. So 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds are going to be very prone, 12-year-olds are going to be very prone to this hypervigilance on how people are perceiving them and what they're thinking about them. So now I'll give a pause on why social media is extremely detrimental for the 13-year-old brain or the pre-adolescent brain. Research is showing this time and time and time again. The data, we've already seen the data that you can tell from 10 to 14 years old, those non-fatal self-harm rates were really, really high. There was other data that reflects this, that especially for the preteen phase, social media technology can be very detrimental. So even recently, by the way, this last week, we finally got some court cases that revealed that social media companies were intentionally marketing and trying to hook teenagers, specifically children, into addictive social media platforms. So now it's not just a theory, now we have research, and now we're getting actual cases, judicial cases that are confirming those results. By and large, 5 years ago, post-COVID, when Chinwe and I started really speaking about this on a consistent basis, we've been speaking about it for a long time, but on national level, sometimes we get pushback and people would say, yeah, but that's not proven that social media is causing that issue. Yeah, but the studies are showing different things. We'd get pushback on it. Well, now there's no more pushback, all right? The data is clear. So here's my recommendation for parents. We recommend no phones, smartphones specifically, before 8th grade. So no phones before 8th grade. So if you get your kid a phone before then, get them a dumb phone, like a flip phone that all it does is call 5 people. There's various different products out there that we could recommend. But certainly, if anything, no social media. Certainly before the age of 14, but even better, I would recommend 16. Because social media is really just not the place for young teenagers to be navigating. I highly recommend throttling that and delaying it as far as possible. So phones can be a little earlier with boundaries, with restrictions. The key here is we don't want to necessarily give our kid a phone and social media access at 18. You want to have a few years where you're guiding them, you're walking with them, you're parenting and coaching them through the process. Again, you're kind of that coach model, especially as they get older in their older teenage years. So you don't want to just be like, when you're 18, you can have a phone. Like, guide them through that process. And here's the thing, like going back to like not doing it perfectly. My oldest son, we gave him a phone when he was 10. Now it was extremely restricted. But there were times when he was, especially like 11, we didn't have a house phone, and there were times like we'd run to the grocery store and leave him at home by himself, so we wanted him to have a device. But I regret doing that. I wish I would have given him a pared down phone. It's not that we opened it up and he had access, it's just that we constantly had to battle the, Dad, can I have this app? Oh, can I have this? Why can't I do this? And then these kids are smart. No matter what you put on restrictions and boundaries, they figure out a way around it, right? They're just, gosh, how are they so smart? And like, I'm pretty technical, so I'm like, I pride myself of like, he won't be able to get around this. Yeah. No, he does. They figure it out. They can do it. So I wish like we didn't do that. I wish we gave him a different kind of device. So I highly recommend, and so for my daughters who are a little younger, they remind us all the time, well, Liam got his phone at blah, 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 blah. And I say, yeah, and he's the guinea pig, so you're welcome. I'm kidding. Tongue in cheek, I do say that to him. But so we just own it. We're honest about it. And we say, you know what? And in hindsight, we kind of wish we did that differently. We just own it. So panic attacks are a part of this, intense physical reaction, feeling of loss of control, or obsessing or controlling the future, or trying to reduce risk. This is when anxiety becomes a little bit more problematic. You guys can go to the next slide. In teens and young adults, this may look like irritability or disobedience. In social settings, they may appear to be dependent, withdrawn, or uneasy, or they may protest when they're apart from friends or having constant busyness. So what looks like just teenage angst could possibly be that they're feeling and dealing with some anxiety. Now, to what degree? That's where I say there's a spectrum here, and we want to be curious. We want to explore and kind of determine. What we do know is that anxiety levels have risen tremendously amongst teenagers. We've lost a little bit of resilience in our generation. We've talked about why that is in the previous session. And we, now have talked about some things that we could do to kind of reduce the risk of anxiety or even other mental health challenges by making sure that we're limiting digital and social media. So here's the question, what can we do? Well, the good news is we have a lot of hope, right? And as parents and caring adults, we can help our kids to cope with anxiety. Going back to the brain. So the brain, right side to the left side function, as you know. The problem is that anxiety likes to take our stress and distort the truth. So when we feel anxiety likes to take what we're dealing with today, the stress, the cortisol levels, and it likes to distort the reality and specifically project it into the future. So the easiest way that we like to say this is anxiety is a liar. So what happens is that sometimes when we feel anxiety, and we all face anxiety, right? But what happens is we face anxiety and then we shift over to the left side of the brain, we logically process, and we cope back to a place of normal and peace and calm. We don't allow it to spiral over to keep projecting in the future. Well, if we have lies that are kind of the baseline, these lie beliefs, then what happens, we feel some anxiety, and then a lie becomes the feeling to the thought, and it starts to spiral from there. I'm always going to feel this way. It's all in my head. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm always going to feel alone, right? Now we're spiraling, and anxiety becomes bigger. If you've ever struggled with anxiety, the feeling is it kind of rises, right? You feel the pressure rising. It's like it's climbing up the ladder. The goal is we want to teach our kids that to never have anxiety, because the reality is you'll never not have anxiety. Anxiety is normal. You're always going to feel stress. You're always going to feel some anxiety from time to time. For instance, if your kid has an exam coming up and they're feeling anxious about that exam, that's okay, right? Like we're always going to feel a little bit of anxiety when something's important to us. If you have a big project at work, that feeling that you feel that you've never called in your life anxiety is anxiety. it's a healthy dose of pressure. It's a healthy dose of anxiety, and that's okay. But we want to keep it here, and we don't want it to continue to spiral. Lies are typically what allows it to rise and spiral more. Anxiety ultimately is a liar. So here's some of the things that we try to help kids with is really identifying and recognizing what are anxiety's common lies. What are the things that anxiety is going to tell you that will, when you face it, you could either reframe that thought or keep it going. Well, if you keep it going, anxiety is going to spiral. If you stop that thought and you reframe that thought and you kind of replace it with a truth and do some coping skills, you can keep anxiety from really spiraling further. Having somebody to help you do this is certainly helpful. So 6 lies, these are not exhaustive, but these are just some that we found in our research. Anxiety will tell you I'm not safe. Now, there are times when you certainly are not safe. Like I live in Florida, we have hurricanes. If a massive hurricane is heading towards you, your brain is telling you you're not safe. Well, that's not a lie, right? If you're in the middle of a tornado and your brain's telling you you're not safe, that's not a lie, that's a truth. You are not safe. The problem is, and this is what happened post-hurricane, is how many of my friends, 2 weeks after the storm, their brain was still telling them they're not safe, right? That's that anxiety, and that honestly, it's a trauma response, but that's what kept the engine kind of running is I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. There was that spinning in the head. I should just ignore it. It's all in my head. I have no control. There's nothing I can do about this. Feeling stuck is a big anxiety lie. I'm going to miss out, and I can do it alone. I don't need help. So when anxiety lies, it tends to spiral. So I'm going to go through a few of these of how we can help reframe anxiety for our kids. The first one is it's all in my head. Now, I'm going to be honest. As parents, caregivers, caring adults, if we don't understand anxiety, and going back to the person who said, like, I don't get anxiety. I don't face anxiety. It's not a thing for me. I just kind of navigate it. This is sometimes something that we unintentionally reinforce. We'll tell kids who are facing anxiety, hey, it's just all in your head. You just need to think different thoughts. And that is half true, but sometimes it's really hard to get there when you're here, right? So it goes back to that right brain. Right brain is elevated, and how do I get there? Well, we have to remember that my mind is connected to my body. So it's technically not all in your head. Your anxiety is actually very physical and whole body, especially if they're feeling panic attacks, that very much is in the body. If they're feeling anxiety and they feel that stomach pain or some of those other physical symptoms that we mentioned, that certainly is in the body. So recognizing and remembering that my mind is connected to my body is helpful because we can start to ask different questions. How's my body doing? What am I thinking about? And what am I feeling? And how are those two things connected? We remember that our mind is connected to our body, and it helps us to reframe to, I don't just need to change my thoughts. I might need to change something physically that I'm doing. So we have to remember that what can I do? I can build healthy habits. This is important because when it comes to helping our kids cope with anxiety, sometimes the absolute best thing to do is to teach them healthy habits. That when anxiety starts to rise, to start to do something different. When it comes to kind of precursory, if they're not in the spiral of anxiety, they're not feeling anxiety in the moment, what are things that they can do to prevent anxiety or cope with anxiety ahead of time? We can build healthy lifestyle habits like increasing healthy foods, exercising, and sleep. These are all things that are going to boost the brain. In fact, let me pause for a minute and say, I think I have it later on in my notes, but I'll get ahead of myself. Even spiritual disciplines will help build a resilience against anxiety. In fact, even some research that we dove into found that spiritual disciplines really do help the brain cope with anxiety. I like to think of them as like they're vitamins for the brain. You're inviting God into your anxiety, and that's really powerful. But doing some healthy habits, increasing healthy foods, there is a tremendous amount of food that will help reduce anxiety, helps promote brain health, and keeps the brain a little bit more capable of navigating pressure and reducing cortisol loads. Exercise is probably the best thing that you can do for anxiety. It's moving that cortisol out, and it's helping the brain to process. And sleep is huge. If your teenagers are not getting enough sleep, fight for that sleep. Like, try to prioritize sleep, because that will really help, especially if they're dealing with anxiety. Set up some boundaries to prioritize sleep. Naturally, teenagers are going to start going to bed later as they get older. That is not just a bad teenager behavior. It's part of how their brain is wired in the developmental phase. They tend to, in that age, just their clock shifts. Their biological clock starts to shift to a later time, and so that'll happen. The problem is that they still need to wake up, some of them at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. to get ready for school. So we have to work and do our best to back that up. I recommend that you cut off devices and screens at least 30 minutes before bedtime, but honestly, an hour would be ideal. Really allowing their brain to shift. This is, whenever I'm talking to teenagers about anxiety, I really hit on this because in the church world especially, like, sometimes we unintentionally will say things like, well, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, said, don't worry about the future, just trust him and seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. So just pray more and worry less. And there is power in God's word. There's power in the truth of Scripture. There's power in Jesus' name. There's power in his presence. He is present with us, and where he is, there is peace. But we also have to remember that our faith and our actions have to align. And so oftentimes I'll talk to teenagers who are telling me about their anxiety, and then as I'm sharing with them and getting a little bit more context, I find out that they're having 6 energy drinks a day. And I'm like, okay, hold on. So you're praying, God, heal my anxiety. God, heal my anxiety. Help me with my anxiety. God, I feel so anxious. I'm not sleeping. God, heal my anxiety. And the Lord's like, stop drinking energy drinks. Right? Like, I'm helping you, and you keep running the system up. You keep pumping it full of these things that actually promote anxiety and increase all this stress, cortisol levels. So we have to keep that in mind, that it's not just all in my head. The brain is connected to the body, and our faith and our actions have to align here. So when we talk about coping with anxiety, I think the number one most important thing to remember is that movement combats stress. Movement combats stress. When I do school assemblies, I do public middle school and high school assemblies all across the U.S., and every single one of them, we start off with a dance party. And then when sometimes when I'm teaching about anxiety with students, I'll have them stand up and we'll just have a dance party real quick. And it's silly, it's dumb, and they just move their body, and they're terrible dancers, most of them. But it's really not about that. What it is I want them to see, just by moving your body, how much different you feel. Like, even if it's 1%, you're going to feel 1% better. It's just part of it. Moving your body is going to combat stress. We talk about deep breathing, taking big, deep breaths, helping them learn how to breathe and have breathing techniques. Those are all really helpful tools. So one of the things that we help teenagers realize is, how can you invite God in? You can grow in self-control. Self-control is a spiritual discipline, right? It's a spiritual fruit, rather. So we can invite God in by saying, okay, God, help me to grow in self-control. Help me to build some healthy habits that will promote and build up my brain, and help me to have some resilience against anxiety. I don't usually, this isn't the verse I was thinking of, but I'll share this verse. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of love, of power, of love, and self-control, that we have the ability to have self-control to build up some healthy habits. The other verse I was thinking of is when it comes to this idea of practical and spiritual together, I always think about in 1 Timothy that Paul writes to Timothy and says, oh, hey, about your stomach issues, drink a little wine, you know? And it's not, this isn't like a moral statement of like, yeah, there you go, everybody go drink some wine. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is Paul, the best medical advice he had for Timothy's stomach issues and the gut biome and whatever was happening, he wouldn't have used those words, but he was thinking like, hey, wine can help settle the stomach with what you're dealing with based off of our medical knowledge. So Paul gave Timothy a very practical solution. The point is even here in the scriptures, we see the apostles, he could have responded to Timothy and said, hey, Timothy, I heard you're having a stomach issue. I'm going to pray for you and, hope it goes away, right? He didn't do that. Now, was Paul praying for Timothy? He certainly was. Did he pray for his stomach issues? I'm sure he did. But he also gave him a very practical tool. So I say that to say, like, when it comes to anxiety, certainly we're going to pray and ask God to help us, help our kids, help us help our kids, right? But we're also going to look at these practical things that we know of how God's wired the brain and include those as well. So that's all. All right, here's the next lie. The next lie is that teenagers often feel is I should just ignore it. I should just ignore it. This never works, right? How many of you know ignoring emotions, what happens? They come out eventually. I have struggled with anxiety at different times in my life. And from time to time, I've struggled with anxiety to a larger degree and at times a smaller degree. I probably am more prone to anxiety just based off of my natural wiring. I'm a pretty wiry person. I drink a lot of coffee, so there you go. So recognizing that, now I have implemented coping skills, a lot of the things that Dr. Chinwe and I write about. But when I was 22, I was a young youth pastor, and I didn't necessarily know a whole lot about anxiety. I didn't know, I was a psych major in my undergrad, but I didn't really understand a whole lot of specifically about anxiety. And at 22, I experienced a panic attack for the first time. And it was 2 a.m. and something just started spinning in my head. I don't even remember what it was. And I felt like I was having a heart attack. And then I was convinced that I was having a heart attack. And after a while, I realized, okay, I'm probably not having a heart attack. I just can't breathe. I'm hyperventilating. I called my fiance at the time, my wife, Ann, and let her know. I go to her house. It's like 2 a.m. I'm like, I just don't know how to feel normal, And she talks me through it. I finally am able to fall asleep. But for days, I still felt really just my system was amped up. And ultimately, when I stopped and I started seeing a therapist and asking the question, how did I get there? Because I remember being like, God, why did you let me get there? Why did you not give me peace when I was praying for you to help me? What was happening? The reality was I was going through a lot that year, and I wasn't processing those emotions. I was just stuffing them. I would experience something, and I would say, but God, I trust you. Yeah, this is really bad, but you know what? I'm going to just trust the Lord. And I would just almost jump to my faith, and I would never process the grief or the pain. That year, my wife had lost her cousin, my fiance at the time. She lost her cousin to a sickness, an illness. And really about a month and a half later, I lost my grandfather. And then a week later, I lost a mentor in my life. And then a month later, her parents split up. And meanwhile, we're just engaged trying to plan a wedding, which planning a wedding, although it's happy and good, but it's also really stressful. And it was my first year at a brand new career, a brand new church that I was working at. And then her grandfather passes away. So we had this month after month after month, just these huge events and moments, and I never processed them. So come September, all of a sudden I have this panic attack, and I'm like, where did that come from? I'll tell you where it came from. I ignored all the emotions that I was facing, and I stuffed them, and I stuffed them, and I stuffed them. Well, as you know, eventually That's going to catch up to us. So typically when you stuff your emotions and you ignore your emotions and you ignore that processing, it will come out eventually. And, I like to think this question is like, are you a volcano or are you a sinkhole? And here's what I mean by that. Going back to that illustration of take a big, deep breath of air. Eventually it comes out, boom. And you react around the people around you. You're cutting, you're fit of rage, you're angry, you're just blowing up. Or it's all the emotions come rushing over the dam, right? And it just spirals and you're just, it just all hits you all at once, right? So a volcano. But the other way that this comes out is eventually all those emotions kind of sink into you. And that's where that emotional detachment happens. That's where you're more prone to depressive symptoms or despair when those emotions just kind of sink in, because what happens is the brain detaches from the emotional state. You become emotionally detached. And so it kind of sinks in and you almost become numb to all the emotions. So neither one of these scenarios are great. So what can we do? How can we help our kids? Help them to emotionally exhale. Now, I don't want to spend too much time here because we spent a lot of time talking about emotional exhales and the tools that we can use. Obviously, the feelings wheel is a great tool, but I just wanted to make sure that you understood that those principles of helping them to identify emotions, process those emotions, are really helpful with anxiety as well. Notice it, label it, help them to cope. We have the feelings wheel as well. These are all great anxiety tools. Another great tool, if you have a kid that's struggling with anxiety, is help them to journal their thoughts. So that THINK acronym that we talked about, that could be really helpful with processing and journaling negative thoughts. If you can help identify some negative thoughts, have them process that negative thought and say, okay, this is something that you think about a lot. Challenge that thought. Is it true? Like, write about that. Okay, it's not true. Why is it not true? Okay, what is true, right? So really help them to process and journal. Journaling has been found to be very, very good for the brain. Research has shown that. But here's the other thing we found. We've seen that, I don't know, this is an observation, okay? The observation is more and more we're hearing that teenagers are journaling, and it's almost like there's this like resurgence of interest in journaling. So I would encourage your kids, your teenagers to journal. If your kid is experiencing a panic attack, here's some key steps to help them. Number one, remind them that they are safe and that this will pass. So your brain, we didn't talk about it in the first session, but your brain has these mirror neurons, right? So I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but if you're hanging out and you're talking with somebody and they put their hand on the chin, like sometimes you don't realize it, but subconsciously you'll put your hand on your chin, right? Or if they have their arms crossed, you'll notice yourself, you cross your arms. There is not a back to that chair. And so your brain just naturally, we mirror the other people around us. Well, the same is true with our nervous system. So you can let your kids borrow your nervous system. So when they're in a heightened state of anxiety, so this goes to the question again of like, how do I help my kid when I don't understand anxiety? Just by slowing down your breath, your tone, and your presence there, if you don't even have to tell them to like breathe. You just start breathing really slow. And here's what you're gonna find. In about a minute, their breathing is gonna match your breathing. You're calm. Your appropriate physical touch, right? Now, all of that, you're going to start to see their nervous system start to come down because they're borrowing your nervous system. The mirror neurons will naturally just process. Everyone, take a deep breath with me. Ready? Hold it. Now exhale. Let's do it one more time. Ready? Take a deep breath. Hold it, and exhale. Raise your hand if you feel 1% better. Right? Isn't that crazy? And I don't know if you noticed this, while I was talking about this, I started talking a little bit softer. I started breathing a little bit more steady. And I don't know if you noticed this, but I bet you started to feel a little bit calmer, even if you weren't like super heightened on your But my point is like, you can borrow somebody's nervous system. So remind them that they're calm. Start breathing. Start breathing with them, slow and steady breaths. Give them an object to focus on. So if they're like in a deep panic, anxiety attack, say, hey, focus on this water with me, all right? Let's just breathe. Look at the water. Focus on the water. What do you see, right? Now this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, this is a very effective grounding tool, especially when somebody's in a panic attack. So the 5 things that you can see. Tell me 5 things that you can see. Okay, I can see this water. I can see this phone. I can see you on the front row. I can see the stage. I can see this table, okay? Now, 4 things that you can touch, okay? And then have them do it, okay? I can feel my jeans. I can feel this water. I can feel my phone. And I can feel my sweater. And have them say it out loud, okay? 3 things that you can hear, okay? I can hear the hum of the lights, the sound of my voice in the speakers, and somebody sniffling. Okay, now 2 things you can smell. I don't really smell anything, but I can smell my sweater and I can smell my cologne, okay? And now 1 thing you can taste. So, have them taste something, I can take a drink of water and, okay, I can taste it. Okay, here's why. When you do that grounding technique, the brain can't spiral in anxiety and do those exercises. So it really helps them to realize I'm not way over here or wherever my brain is spiraling and feeling unsafe. I'm here, I'm present, I'm in this moment, and it helps just reshift the brain back. So ultimately, here's what we encourage teenagers. What can they do to invite God in? They can talk to God. God is always present, and prayer is powerful. And especially, like I said, the journaling process of talking to God, journaling scriptures or journaling your thoughts, I think is really, really great. We talked about this. No, this is a different verse. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds through Christ Jesus. In other words, that God's not saying pray more, worry less in this verse. He's just saying that we have access to him and that there is a return on that there will be a peace that transcends understanding. We don't understand it, but that peace will guard our hearts and our minds in Jesus' name. And so another thing we remind teenagers is just remind them that they are not their anxiety. Teenagers, young adults tend to over-attach to their mental health challenges. I kind of joke that sometimes they're like, hi, my name is Will. I struggle with anxiety. It's like they almost they identify as like a part of them. And we just remind them that just because you have a mental health challenge doesn't mean that's who you are. That's no different from anything else in our bodies, right? Like none of us walk around and be like, hi, I'm Will, I have astigmatism. Like we don't do that. It's not who I am, it's just a challenge that I have. And the same is true with our mental health challenges, that we are so much more than our anxiety. We remind kids that when anxiety starts to spiral, here's what's true about you. You are God's child. You are accepted. You are protected. You are redeemed. You do have a purpose, and you do have hope. And anxiety will try to say that just because I have a problem today, that's what's going to be tomorrow. But just because you're dealing with something today doesn't mean that that's tomorrow. And that tomorrow will be different, that there is always hope. And we don't have to just take whatever we're thinking and believe it to be true. We help kids to remember that not everything you think is true. And so we can challenge those thoughts. But parents, I want to give you a challenge as well. That don't just run to challenging the thoughts, help them first to decrease all that right brain energy, then help them challenge the thoughts. Then give them the tools to reframe and really work through that. Our book, Beyond the Spiral, by the way, is specifically not written for parents. It's actually written for teenagers and young adults, and it has exercises in it to help kids kind of work through those exercises, just to learn some anxiety, some very practical anxiety coping tools. But to the parent that said, what do I do with the kid that won't do it? that is just, like I said, part of that teenage pushback where they're just going to push against authority. But keep trying, keep showing up, keep giving them different tools, and hopefully they'll start taking a positive step. If anything else, cut off their caffeine, all right, and their energy drink budgets. But ultimately, I would say, listen, don't give up. Just remember, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be a therapist to help your kid. You don't have to know the Bible inwards and outward. You just have to keep loving them, keep showing up, be intentional, and know that that intentionality, your love, your empathy matters a whole lot.